There's the bell. Hey, welcome to my world. Just come on in. There was the bell. It doesn't sound like a bell. It sounds more like an electronic tone. Oh. Come on in. Make yourself at home. Keep your shoes on. Okay. Set a spell. Set a spell. Take your shoes off, y'all. Come back now, you hear? Okay, come on in, come on in, come on in. That's Bill on old-time television. He hadn't seen anything after 1968 on television, so. Isn't anything worth watching? Okay, we'll go with that. Glad you're here this evening. Let's see. Seemed like I had something else here in front of me. Everybody on TV is wondering, on TV, everybody online on the live stream wondering what's going on. I thought I ought to look at the announcements and see what we got going on here. Maybe you got an email. Did everybody pick up one of the sheets back there? Need one of the sheets? Very good. If you didn't, too bad. If you don't get one when you first come in, they cost $1 a piece. I guess we won't sell very many, will I? Okay, good. Seriously, glad you're here this evening. If you're online, maybe you got the email. If you're one of the folks here, you probably got the email that has it attached to it. You can check on that if you want to, or just go along with us. It'll be on the screen anyway. Let me mention a few announcements. Horace took Betty Phillips to the hospital today. I think, didn't he say he was going to Mercy? Isn't that at Mercy? And afterward, I thought, is that what he said to me? They were going to Mercy and dealing with an infection on her lung. So they've been trying to treat it at home, and it felt like they need to go to the hospital, get IV antibiotics. Anyway, so there's that. Brian Adams said he hopes to go home tomorrow, had his surgery yesterday, hopes to go home tomorrow. Said his parents that we mentioned doing much better. Keep Roy's mother and his family in your thoughts and prayers. Pretty ill. I haven't talked to Carla any further about her sister Patricia, but dealing with an infection in her knee after that. And Walter, and I can't remember what day he told me. Somebody might remember what day Walter said he's to have his pacemaker. Did anybody pick up? I'm not sure. It's coming up pretty soon. I was thinking it was next week, and it might be next Tuesday, but I'm pretty sure it's next week. What? 21st. That's Saturday, isn't it? Maybe it is. Okay. So maybe it's Saturday. Anyway, it's coming up pretty soon. Get a pacemaker in so that hopefully he doesn't disrupt our services anymore. No, hopefully that will help level out his heart for him. I'm sorry. I didn't mean anything bad. There are a few other things by way of announcements. Ladies' exercise class tomorrow evening, 6:30 every Thursday night. Yeah, get in there and get some workout going. Ladies' coffee Friday morning, 10 a.m., and Sunday, there'll be a VBS planning meeting. It doesn't seem like VBS time, but we got to get those plans in place. And all that's Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock. You've probably seen all those things, but those were the things I thought I better come up and make sure and repeat them. You know, if you repeat them often enough, then people can ignore them more easily. Is that right? You never know. Anyway, those are those things. We're going to look at our final lesson on Philemon this evening. Yay, let's get it over with. You said, seemed like we've been a little bit redundant. Probably has. Frankly, I'll tell you, I've enjoyed looking at it, breaking it down. If you didn't, I'm sorry. But I've enjoyed that. And I think if you look at it, there are several lessons we will get out of the study, and I hope it's been worth your time to do that. With that in mind, I'll remind you or mention there's a little box back there with pink paper stuck on it and a hole in the top of it, a little notepad next to it just for your convenience. If you've got a subject or a scripture or a topic that you would like for us to study on a Wednesday evening to work on together, if you just jot it on the note, drop it in the box. If you feel like it needs some explanation further and you need me to talk, we need to go over it, put your name on it so I know who to talk to and everything, and then we'll tell everybody what a doofus you are. No, I wouldn't do that, seriously. But if you got some, please do that. I'd like to study the things that you want to study and go over some of those things, and all. We'll look forward to that. Put it on there. If you say, well, I just can't think tonight, you think of something late tonight, tomorrow, or next, in the next few days, shoot me a text or an email, and I'll add it into the list and everything. But if there's something that you would like to, please do that, and we'll be glad to talk about those things together. If you're interested in something, probably there are others that are interested in that. I was talking to a friend, preaches in another congregation earlier today, and he said, I'm talking about the work that he's been doing. He said, and I started some Wednesday nights on hard questions from the Bible. And I said, hard questions from the Bible? Doesn't the Bible answer all the questions? And he said, come on, Russ. I said, okay. And he mentioned a few of the things. I said, yeah, I could see those are things that would catch people's attention. And so I think there's nothing too hard or nothing too easy for us to look at. We may not get all the answers, but we'll try, won't we? Very good. Okay, let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll get into our study this evening, unless there's something else that somebody needs to add before that. Okay, I've wasted enough time, right? Okay, let's bow for a prayer. Father and God, again, thank you for the blessing of life, the times that we can be together, the privileges, and so many things that are given to us every day. We're thankful here in the midst of winter of having seasons of warmth like this that are more comfortable to us. And yet, Father, we understand that every season has its purpose and its being as you've created it all. And help us, Father, to value and appreciate every day, because we know each one we have is a gift from you. We mentioned those that we love this evening that are important to us, and some that are in the hospital, even as Betty is in the hospital right now, and others that are hopefully getting out, like Brian and others, and Walter looking forward to his surgery with the pacemaker, and others. Father, we pray that you will bless them. We're thankful that others have gotten over the virus in recent days, and we look forward to good health and opportunities. We continue to pray your blessings on us in that way. And now, Father, as we endeavor to study these things, help us to draw in each of our lives some good understanding and good blessing that we can use these things in our lives at this time and in the future. Help us to be a part of one another and encouraging in everything we do. And it is in Jesus we pray. Amen. All right, again, I hope you've had a good day. Let's talk about this idea. I came across this quote, true friends are always together in spirit. I thought that was a good thing. Goes kind of along with this idea of Philemon. This evening, we're looking at binding ties in verse 22. It says, push future engagements. Well, that makes sense when we look at the verse at hand. I actually put more than verse 22 on there, put 20 through 22. Maybe it helps make a little bit of sense in our lesson as he writes, and we go into the background just a little bit. In verse 20, it says, yes, brother, let me have joy from you in the Lord. Refresh my heart in the Lord. Having confidence in your obedience, I write to you knowing that you will do even more than I say. That was up to last week. And then verse 22, but meanwhile, also prepare a guest room for me, for I trust that through your prayers I shall be granted to you. Then the final verses are basically greetings and so forth, and they tell us a little bit about some of the people that are important. But this is our key point. In this is the idea of, meanwhile, prepare a guest room for me. Sounds like a friend talking to a friend. I'm coming to visit. Get ready, I'm coming to town, and I want to see you. So look at this passage. There are a few things in it that kind of stand out. One, he says, in the meantime. In the meantime. I didn't look to see how many times that might be used in the Bible. I don't remember it being a common phrase that is used in the New Testament. But we think about that idea, but meanwhile, that's what we would normally say. Meanwhile, that's what they do on television. While this is going on, meanwhile, this is going on. And basically, Paul says to him, while we're waiting around, in the interim, that's on your sheet, it says, in the interim, in the interval between one specified time and another. He's laid out all these other things, and to do with Onesimus and everything. He says, now, while we're waiting on this, while we're getting all this figured out, there's a time frame in here. He said, I want you to get ready. I'm coming to visit you and all. And that it's not a threat. It's not an ugly thing at all. But if we look at this, and I've made some comments about this recently, is the idea of waiting and how hard it is to wait. Somewhere I picked up on something just recently. I think it was a commercial or something I saw during a game or something recently, and the person on there was saying, you know how hard it is for me to wait. And I thought, isn't it for most of us? Anybody in here like to go and stand in line and wait? No? No? When I was really a young man, I didn't mind waiting in line if I could wait with the right person. You know, there were usually girls standing in line when I was really young. Don't tell my wife that. She thinks she's the first girl I ever met in my life. But you go wait. You know what we do at church services sometimes is you go at the college church in Searcy when I was a student in school, you go and watch. You stand at the back and you watch those girls come in and sit down, and then you find an empty spot right next to them, you know. Didn't do much good, but they usually just kind of look at you with that look like, oh, whoa. But waiting for something to happen. Do something while you're waiting. Do something while you're waiting. It's hard to wait, and waiting for one another, though, is something important. You remember in 1 Corinthians 11, one of the criticisms that the Apostle Paul had of the church in Corinth is that they were not patiently waiting for one another. They were quite often, at many of their services, it appears, were conducted. They would have a meal when they came together as well. And all. I don't know all the details of that, but people they would come in and they'd start eating. They'd eat up the food, and some of the people that got there a little later, they didn't get much to eat, kind of like some of us that go at the back of the line in here. Some of you people go up the front and eat all the food and leave nothing for it. No, we've always got more than enough food, but he was criticized. They'd go in there and they'd gobble up food, and some people didn't really get much. And he said, and there was a bad attitude at work. And then you try to have the Lord's Supper in the midst of these gatherings, and things are not working together. You're not acting like Christians. He said, you can't have the Lord's Supper this way. That's not the way it works. And so that idea of tarry for one another, I think it's many of the translations put there in 1 Corinthians 11, tarry for one another. It is hard to wait. And waiting for one another, though, and I like this idea, and I forget how I heard say this, waiting for one another is an expression of a shared grace. You know you've been blessed, and it's an opportunity to bless someone else. Really nice. Stopped at Brahms on the way over here. Surprises you, doesn't it? Didn't eat any ice cream, though. Stopped at Brahms, and as Paul and I are walking in the door, you know, the automatic doors open up. There's an old gentleman, much older than me. I don't know how old he was. An older gentleman carrying a couple of heavy-looking bags, probably had 5 gallons of milk in there. I don't know what he had. Carrying a couple of heavy bags, and he steps back and he says, go ahead, come in. And I said, no, sir, you're the one carrying the bags. You please go ahead. But he was hesitant. Everybody was trying to be polite and wait for one another. I think we do that a lot. We try to be polite. We try to recognize somebody. Now, one thing about getting older and having gray hair, people tend to hold the door for you more often. I like that. I like that. It is a sign of grace, I think, recognizing I've been blessed, I can do this, so I do that for one another. Yes, sir. Yes. Isn't it worth waiting if there's a good thing going to happen? Absolutely. You know, you think about that. There's I don't know whether that's really a good thing, a movie you want to see, and you go to the theaters. Anybody still go to the theater anymore? You go to the theater to see this movie. You get there 30 minutes early, and you wait. And then hopefully the movie's good enough to enjoy when you're there anyway. But when it's something good, that would be pretty small time. But if you're waiting on someone, you're waiting to see someone that's important, you're going to something that is important, and in this case, it is, especially in this. Very good thought in that. Yeah, Sue? Yeah, the military, they teach a lot of waiting in the military and waiting in line. I will say, in the early days of going to school, back before computers were, of course, what they are today, the punch card computers of the day, we stood in long lines just getting registered for classes and things like that. It was an all-day affair to do those kind of things. Isn't that something? It happens sometimes, doesn't it? You wait in line and then somebody says, okay, you're late, no more. That's the end of that one. Most of the time, they're pretty good. Don't let that happen, but yeah, it does.
Which church it was, but there was one that thought, I guess it was Thessalonian, that thought Christ was late coming.
Oh,
They were
yes.
expecting him, and they waited on him, and they waited long enough. Paul had to,
That's right. Paul Peter addresses that same thing. Listen, don't think this way, because a day with the Lord is 1,000 years, is Peter's response. And then Paul's response was, here's what you need to look for and look to see. Yeah, very good. The Thessalonians, they were struggling with the time frames and so forth, as Peter's audience was. Did I see another hand? Yes, sir.
Isn't that a little funny, though, because they had to wait for the Messiah to come the first time for 1,000 years?
Oh, yeah.
At least 400 we know of, from the time the Old Testament ended until Christ came. So there's at least a 400-year period in there.
Yes, from the time we read the last.
And now all of a sudden it's 70 years
And they were all excited and worried about it and say, how can we wait any longer? It's only been, we got these 70 years. They didn't understand fully what was going on. Yes, you're right. You can go back from the time of Moses, maybe 14 to 1,700 years from Moses to the time of Christ and so forth. So it's a long span just from the time the law was enacted till Jesus came. And then we're talking about 70 years. That's almost nothing when you think about that or something. But 400 years from the end, basically the end of the prophecies that we have of the Old Testament in a way.
1,000 years for Christ, but then most of them didn't accept him when he came.
That's right. You wait all that time and then don't accept him when he gets there. But there were Christians that they were thinking it was imminent. They thought he was coming at any time and so forth. And, of course, John and others try to help them understand that's not necessarily the case, and Peter does especially. Very good. So it says, meanwhile, there's a time of waiting. And it said, and basically while you consider these things, or while I wait your actions, whatever he's trying to say to him, here's something to think about. Well, you think about how fast was communication then, Philemon sends something to him, or he sends something to Philemon. How long is it going to take to get that? It could be weeks for he would get that. So he sends him this letter, and he says, and while all this is going on, and I'm waiting to hear word from you, get things ready. I'm coming to stay with you, and all. Pretty good stuff. But it was not to be done without action on the part of Philemon. He calls him into action. In the meanwhile, do something. And he's got something in mind for him to do in that regard. It was not to be done without the action on the part of Philemon. Yes, Philemon, I want you to do something. We shouldn't be afraid to call people to action. We shouldn't be afraid to call people to action. See, can you do that? Can you do that? I think we live in a time where we're almost hesitant to challenge people into activity. And Paul wasn't afraid. Here he is dealing with all this, and he says, and by the way, I'm coming to see you. Get it ready for me to be there. Sounds like Paul had a pretty good idea, pretty good handle on what he could do.
Did that mean Paul was anticipating being released from prison?
It sure sounds like he was anticipating being released from prison. Of course, we'll get to that in a minute, but he's talking about Philemon's prayers. Evidently, Philemon was praying in that direction, but I don't know what made him think he was going to be released. There's nothing of clarity in here to help us understand exactly what his situation was at this point and how he thought that, or he was just trusting. I believe this is going to happen. Sometimes it's a great ambitious trust that points us forward in that regard. Okay? All right. He says, but I have another request, and this is the other part of it. Not only get ready, not only do I want you to take care of Philemon, but we got this request. In the meantime, get ready. I'm coming to stay with you. Now, we do that with family. We do that with family with certain reservations. You don't even, when you're an adult parent, you don't just call up your kids, say, hey, I'm going to be over. You say, is it okay? Is it all right? Is this a good time? Is this not a good time? I often think about the song, you talk about cats in the cradle, silver spoon, little boy blue, and the man on the moon. If you know the song I'm talking about, it comes down, when you coming home, son? I don't know when, but we'll get together soon, Dad. We'll get together then. Anyway, the idea that Harry Chapin put into that song is the idea sometimes we're too busy for one another. And we don't just pop in on people today the way we might have a generation or two ago. I don't know about you, but I'm uncomfortable just going to some cold knocking on somebody's door. Now, sometimes you have to do that, but you're always worried you're going to be interrupting something and it's going to create more problems than maybe you had before that. I would have never been a good door-to-door salesman. In fact, I wasn't when I was a Cub Scout or a Boy Scout. I was a terrible door-to-door salesman. In fact, when I threw a newspaper, the route manager was always saying, you need to increase your route, you need to increase your route. And I'm thinking, that's big enough for me already. Increase your route. And there were things you could get if you increased your route. If you sold so many subscriptions, you'd get these prizes and things. I wasn't interested in those prizes because I didn't want to have to go knock on the door and sell the subscriptions to the newspaper. I hated doing that. I'm a terrible salesman. Anyway.
One thing is that previously we were more of a rural society.
Yes.
It was not unusual out in the country for someone just to drop in on you, especially if you're sitting on your front porch or something.
You're right. There was a time it was common to just stop by, and you were glad to see somebody stop by, Today, we're not quite as open as we once were, and somebody knocks on the door, especially if it's in the evening after dark, might not even answer the door for you. We live in a little bit different mode of behavior today, but Paul could say, by the way, I'm coming to see you, and has that in mind with him. Yes, ma'am.
Well, back when my parents, when they were younger, they would have had to just drop in. They had no telephone.
There was no telephone? Wow. Is this in the 1600s? No, you're right. And there were a lot of places until well into the 20th century didn't have telephones. You're exactly right. I'm teasing a bit. I recognize that in that regard. Somebody making fun of me over here. It's all right. No telephone. Now everybody's got one in their pocket. There's one laying right here, Except you. Yeah, you got to have a landline. Well, we bought my dad a telephone a few years ago, bought him a cell phone. Yeah, he hated that thing. He'd turn it off and he'd let the battery run down, so I couldn't use it. The battery was dead in it. Wouldn't plug it in. He hated that phone. I don't know why he hung on to it a while. Anyway, but this was not an uncommon thing to say, I will be there, and to expect that you would be accepted when you got there. It might sound to us to be a bit bold on top of what else he's asked of Philemon when we read it today. Philemon, he says, listen, Philemon, I've got this young man that was your slave. He's come to me. I'd really like to keep him. I'm going to send him back to you, but I'd really like to keep him, but don't want to do it without your permission. So he's kind of expecting a lot of Philemon in a way. And then he says, and by the way, fix up a room. I'm ready to come and visit. Get the guest room ready. I'm coming to visit. Sounds kind of bold on his part, doesn't it? What do you think about that?
See, my first reaction was that he was probably glad he was coming. He built up a lot of questions to ask.
Okay. Yeah, he may have had a lot of questions. He said, all right, I'm glad you're coming. I got a bunch of questions. Yeah. Very good, very good. He says, if you get here, we can talk these things over in person. Very good. Yes, yes. But I think we see in this the relationship they have. I think you probably got people who said, could I stop by and spend the night? You said, well, sure. We got the couch in there. You can sleep on the couch. If you don't mind sleeping on the couch, we'll throw a couple of blankets on it and you got it covered and all. We'd make the dog get off and you can sleep there. It'll be just fine. Okay. But then there are people you think, oh man, if they come over, I got to sweep the floor, something like that. I'm exaggerating, and kind of making fun. But we do look at it a little bit differently and all. As I said, I may have said that in here last week. So many times I can remember people coming to our house and my sister and I in particular, being moved out of the room that we slept in, and our beds would be the guests' beds and everything. But it was always exciting for us. But you think about, I didn't ever think about how much extra work it was for my mother, and all. And here are these two men, and he tells Philemon, and Philemon goes home to his wife, by the way, you got to get the room cleaned up. Paul's coming to visit. Hopefully it's a good thing. He might be there a month or 6 months. You never know. You're right. It might not be. It wasn't just, I just need a place to stay overnight before I catch the next train or whatever. No, it didn't work that way, did it? You're right. So it was often an extended stay. But that was kind of expected. And so I don't think he's just being exceptionally bold. I think he's recognizing their relationship. He's recognizing they got more things they can discuss and so forth when they're together. And so it is not an out of the ordinary expectation. And I know what came to my mind is this verse in Luke 12, for everyone to whom much is given, what is the rest of it? Much is required or expected. Yes, you're exactly right. And so if Philemon feels blessed, this is an opportunity for him to bless. Goes back to that statement I drew from just a little bit earlier in that regard. So, as we think about this, and we can consider some others in that, and I know I put down there Luke 19. You can look at that if you want to, but I think what we find here is that it's a testament to the personal relationship between these two men. I know we've emphasized that more than once in this study. These men had a good relationship. They could count on one another. Paul could speak very plainly to this man, and I would imagine that we're not reading what Philemon is saying to him in return, but I would imagine Philemon felt like he could talk plainly to Paul. Remember how Paul describes him? Our beloved friend and fellow laborer. They had a relationship, and when you develop that kind of relationship, there are things you can say that you can't say to just everybody. There are things that you can expect that you don't expect from just everybody and all. You know that you've got friends that are that close to you that you feel like you can say whatever you need to say to them. They can say whatever they need to say to you, and you can express that, and you're not really worried where it's going to go and all. That's a very special friend. And I get that picture with these guys in this regard. Anyway, another statement. Anybody want to throw something in there? You're fine. Please, toss it in. Another statement he makes there is, I trust. I trust. Now, that may seem like a small thing when you look at it and you're looking at the verse, and I trust. When he says, for I trust that through your prayers. Trust is an interesting word, isn't it? When you think about it. Why didn't he just say, and I believe? I think the word trust often carries with it a little bit more than just the idea, I believe. It is it's a word of great confidence, isn't it? Great strength in it. I trust. I think it conveys something where it may not really mean anymore. That he could have said, well, I hope, and we understand what hope is. It's faith just not fully realized yet. It's confidence, but it's not fully realized yet. Trust in many respects is the same thing. It is not fully realized yet. It sets up the stage for something that you're absolutely confident will take place. And he said, I trust. But he does not say, this will happen. Why do you suppose that is? What's he talking about? That by your prayers I will be basically released, Why didn't he just say, and when I'm released, And when I'm released, I'll come see you.
Because Paul always realized it was going to be in God's hands, whether or not he was going to be released or not. And even though Philemon is praying for this,
Right.
doesn't mean that God is always going to grant things the way we want them granted.
You're right on target, and I wish everybody could hear exactly the way you said it, but just because we believe or trust or have confidence it will happen does not mean it will happen. Things are still in God's hands. Our faith may be accurate. We may not be fully accurate. Things may operate differently than we believe they would because it still remains in God's hands.
We're saying, that all things work in Romans, where he's talking about
Yes.
all things work for good. That doesn't mean that the things that work for good always will be what we want.
That's a very good point when it says all things work together for good, Romans 8:28. But that's right. We have to trust that in the end God will work what is best. And I think we have that in prayers sometimes, and I hope we really mean it, that we say, Lord, whatever you do is going to be the best thing we understand. And we pray that we will accept whatever you send our way. Marty?
This is Paul demonstrating his faith.
Okay.
Towards that. It made me think of Hebrews 11:1. Obviously he hopes to be released from captivity.
Yes.
And so he has faith that through the prayers of Philemon and through God's will that this is going to come to happen. He's just communicating that.
I think you're right on target. And again, I think he has a real confidence it is going to happen. But it's not under my control. Don't we make plans for tomorrow? Don't we commonly make plans for tomorrow? And so what? Do we know for a fact that tomorrow will get here for each of us? No. We were just talking earlier about some, people busy about their lives, flying an airplane. Here's a guy playing a football game. You never know what tomorrow's going to bring. Celebrating a victory win, end up in a car wreck and die. You never know what's going to happen. I don't mean to sound morbid or pessimistic, but the reality is there. And isn't that what James reminds us? Say, if the Lord wills. And that's part of what I think he's expressing his faith, and that's exactly what you said in that regard. Okay, I think it carries a little stronger statement of personal confirmation than just saying, I believe. And yes, and it is one directional. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
NIV and ESV use the word hope.
Well, they're just wrong. They can write any word they want. Well, if you define, yes, some of the translations do use the word hope. And if you define it properly, that's correct. Because if you go back to Romans identifies that hope is just something that is real, but it is not fully recognized yet. That's what Paul describes it in Romans 8. That's exactly right. So, and I think that's exactly what he's saying here as well. I'm looking forward to it. I believe it's going to happen. That's my hope. We use hope too often as something like wishful thinking. Oh, I hope I can go. Are you going to get to go on the trip? Oh, I hope so. Sometimes Christians, you ask them the question, if you died today, would you go to heaven? What's that? Oh, I hope so. I'd like to say, yes, with every belief in my body. Every belief in my body. Yes. So, if you define hope properly.
Hope is part of faith. It says it's the meaty part. It's the real part of faith.
The meaty part of faith.
In Hebrews, it says faith is the substance, it's the main thing of something hoped for.
Something hoped for, yes. It is, faith is substance of things hoped for, and it is the confidence, the reality, the substance of things not yet seen.
But it's a hope, just like a trust, because we haven't seen it yet.
Just because we haven't seen it, it's still real. There are things I've never seen in the world. Things I've never seen. I've never seen the Northern Lights. Anybody in here? How many have seen the Northern Lights? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 5 people in here say they've seen the Northern Lights. That's a minority. How many of you, 6, okay, sorry, 6. How many of you who didn't raise your hand don't believe in the Northern Lights? Nobody's putting their hands up. So that means we all believe that the Northern Lights actually do exist or do happen and so forth at certain times and so forth. The Northern Lights are very real, right? Anybody going to doubt it?
How do all things hold together?
Okay. There
That's the real question. You said, why, how do all these things hold? Now, we can say, well, it's gravity. Who has seen gravity?
That's right. We trust a lot of things, even though we can't identify them with our eyes or tangibly. Gravity, I know it works and it gets stronger every day. It keeps pulling me down a little bit more and more. Anyway, but that's it. And he says, I trust. I think I probably beat that horse to death, but I just think he's offering a very, very strong word in regard to that. Okay, and then pointing out that he's leaning on the prayers of another. Not an uncommon thing for us, because what do we often say? Pray for me. Would you include me in your prayers? Would you add me to the prayer list? Would you make sure, pray for me? I don't know how many times I've been in the hospital and somebody said, can we have a prayer before you go? And usually we'd say, if I'm with somebody or by myself, so would you like to have a prayer before we go or something? Very common to do that. We want somebody to pray for us. Does that mean somebody else's prayers are more effective than mine? No, it's just an expression of care and concern and a recognition of something about the other person. Because when we say, will you pray for me, what are we saying about that person?
I care about you.
Well, that's true, yes. It is a trust, but we're saying, I believe that your prayers are effective with God. What are we told? What are we told? What does James tell us? The effectual, fervent prayer of the righteous man avails much. James 5:16. We look at somebody else and you ask somebody to pray for you, you're stating something about that person's character as much as you are saying about God. And so this is a statement about his belief in Philemon's character, even more than it is a statement about God and his power, in the way I look at it. Now, you can look at it any way you want to, and I don't mind if you're wrong, but that's it. He considered the impact of another person's prayers and his confidence in the personal prayer, personal effect of those prayers, and that is an important aspect. It's not a casual thing. It is a very real thing. We see quite often Paul talking about he prayed for them, but this time he says, pray for me, and it's not the only time, but basically calling on him, Philemon's prayers, and recognizing that Philemon has been praying for him. I don't know whether Philemon has communicated that to him, whether word has gotten from Philemon to him. You know, I don't know how that worked exactly, but he does know that Philemon has prayed for him. I wish I could say I have always prayed for every person that mentioned it to me. I wish I could say I had. Sometimes somebody will say something and I say, I surely will, and have let it slip. I try not to, but I have let it slip before I'll admit my fault to you. Generally, if somebody says that to me, before I get very far, I'm going to at least take time then to pray, whether it's private or with the person or not is another matter. And I hope we do recognize how valuable that is. The only reason I say that, we recognize how valuable it is. If you ask me to pray for you, I'm going to make every effort to do that for you, and I would expect the same from you for me anyway. And I know I'm very blessed because quite often I hear, especially in public prayers, people pray for me, and that means more to me than I can begin to describe to you. Anyway, that they would see one another face to face. As we wrap this up, that they would see one another face to face. I said may engage in interesting dynamic with Onesimus involved. Because remember, this is kind of a three-part thing, because you've got Paul, you've got Philemon, and you've got Onesimus as well. And each one of the three has to be cooperative for this all to work, besides God's blessing. Now that's interesting. And if Paul is coming to see him face to face, it's going to engage in interesting repertoire relationship with Onesimus involved in it. Because suppose Philemon sends Onesimus, allows him to be there with Paul. Paul has him there, they're working together, and then they go back to the home of Philemon. Have you ever thought about how interesting that would be for Onesimus, who was formerly his slave? Now he is back as his brother, but he's not really Philemon's slave anymore as much as he is Paul's assistant. Change in dynamics. We talked a little bit about that a few weeks ago. It can be kind of hard to see those kind of changes as things progress and move along. And this could be an interesting, I don't mean anything bad, I'm just saying it could be an interesting dynamic for them working together. And it's something for us to watch out for, because time and relationships change as we move along. Anyway. Yes, sir. Whoops.
The amount of time after Paul wrote to Philemon that he was released from prison. Some places I read was 2 years, 3 years after he wrote the letter, that he actually ventured to Colossae to see him.
Okay. How long was it from the time this is written and everything until they actually get together? Frankly, I don't know. There are some things to point out. It might have been a couple of years. It could have been as much as that. Might not have been that long. It's hard to say. Some have tried to trace Paul's movements, and that's where they get the time frames in that regard, and that may be fairly close. But it's kind of interesting for him to say, get the room ready, I'm coming to visit you, if it's going to be 2 years down the road, I think. I've got an idea it may have been sooner than they think, but I don't know. Or maybe Paul was wrong about his time frame in that regard. I don't know for sure. It could have been, it could be. But my answer is, I really don't know. I kind of had that in mind and questioning that a little bit earlier, thinking about this today. I wonder how long that takes place. And that maybe goes into the second part of question number 1 in this. When it says, can a relationship be on hold pending the outcome of other events and still be strong relationship? And I think that's what it comes down to. If this is a duration of time, can this be what it really needs to be if we got to wait a couple of years in that regard? I sure hope so. I sure hope so. You know, time should not be the thing that hinders a relationship in that regard. Where does it say that he did see him? I think it's kind of a guesstimate from him going to Colossae or something that he would actually see him when he was there. We don't have a literal meeting of the two coming together that I know of. Yeah, is that correct? Unless I'm off in that, I don't know of a literal statement of them meeting. Yeah, after that, I think we just assume it took place. Fair enough. If we're wrong, I'll admit it at the gates to heaven. While you're going the other way. Anyway, but no, sorry. Oh, did that slip out? I didn't intend to say that out loud. Okay, but what? I don't think it's right. We've still got about a minute or so here, so you got to endure me just that much longer. What? Less than a minute. Well, you know. Wow. Okay. Well, I better hurry then. If you were in Philemon's shoes, what would you think of Paul's request to get ready for a visit? What would you think today? Put that in 21st century. What would you think about that?
Well, actually, the church is in Philemon's house.
Yes.
So can you imagine having Paul in your house to help you teach?
Isn't that, yes. Can you imagine having Paul in your house if that's where the church is meeting? Yes. And again, they already know one another, but I think about that in regard, well, there goes our tone. But I go back to what Sid was saying a while ago. He's there to answer, he's going to answer the questions that we can't get long distance very well. So I think we need to see things from the opportunity that it brings, rather than the thought of, oh man, I got to get things ready for him to be here. It provides an opportunity to have him there and with you.
Pretty evident that Jesus was staying in Mary and Martha and Lazarus' house.
Okay. Yes. Can you imagine having Jesus in your home and all the people that would be in and out while you were there and trying to take care of all that? And probably it wasn't too far from that to have Paul come be at your house like you were saying, and to be there and to share that. It could be pretty special. I have some stories about people coming and visiting, some very notable preachers and so forth. And I've told you before, one of the best Sunday afternoons I ever spent was sitting listening to two preachers that were much older than me, that were good friends, just bantering back and forth about things. It was a great afternoon for me. Anyway, well, thank you much. That's pretty much the time we've got this evening. We have other questions on there, but we're not going to get to them tonight. You think about it and spend some time with it. I'll trust you that. What are some of the best lessons you've recognized in this short personal letter? I think there's some great ones in it, and I hope it means something to you. But thank you all for being a part of the class, and we'll see what we've got coming for next week.